Truck drivers, what's a creepy story you've got from the middle of nowhere? Trucker here. I think the best creepy thing that ever happened to me was I was heading from Tucson as up into Salt Lake City. Well, this was a few years ago, and the main highway had been taken out in a flash flood, was under construction, so I had to take a weird detour through the mountains in lower Utah. Well, it was getting late, and I was getting tired, so I pulled off onto the shoulder and went to sleep in my bunk. Now this was in the middle of nowhere. Closest town was like 40 miles away, so it is completely pitch black outside once I turn the lights off. Anyway, around 4 AM I wake up because I'm hearing something messing with my truck, like playing with the air and power cables between my cab and the trailer, which is literally 6 inches from where my head is at but on the outside of the cab. Then I feel something climb onto the landing that's on the back of my truck, and it shakes my whole truck. So I'm guessing something around 200 to 300 pounds was climbing around back there. I'm thinking like a mountain lion or a bear. At this point I'm wide the fuck awake, and I want to get this thing away from me. So I slam my hand into my cab wall trying to scare whatever is out there. Slam hard enough to really make it loud. I then hear someone, a male, scream bloody murder, and I hear them fall off the back of my truck. I then hear about 15 other people all around my truck yelling. I climb up front, turn on my lights, and illuminate a squad of army reserves doing their midnight truck march and capture drills. Turns out these guys were supposed to go find an abandoned truck and secure it for their midnight drills. That truck was 3 miles back down the road. They were not expecting me to be sleeping there and thought I was part of the drill. I'm ex-military, so after explaining I was not part of their test and legit was just there out of coincidence, we laughed it off. They had to radio to their CO and tell him I was there and not have the other squads bother me. I posted this somewhere else recently, but it fits better here. I used to deliver hotshot freight across the Great Plains / Minnesota area. One night around 2 AM I was hauling across North Dakota trying to reach Montana by morning. I was delivering a particularly valuable tractor part that a farm desperately needed for the following day. I began to notice some highway hypnosis sneaking up on me, but it didn't really bother me because I'd been through it hundreds of times before. Anyone who has driven across North Dakota knows that it is incredibly flat, like really flat. There also tends to be very straight and long roads. It's somewhat easy to see things on the road that are far away, even at night. I noticed something long on the road, spanning my entire lane, approximately half a mile in front of me. I slowed down a little and prepared to move into the opposite lane, thinking it was some retread off a blown tire. As I got closer I noticed it was 2 people laying head to toe across the entire lane. I swerved into the other lane, successfully avoiding them, and came to an almost complete stop. But they didn't move, not an inch. I was just about to back up and check on them when I remembered a story that an old graybeard colleague of mine told me. He told me that in certain remote areas, people will lie down in the middle of the road and wait for a car or truck to stop and see what's going on. At that point, the road players along with whoever else is hiding in the nearby bushes will beat the shit out of the driver and steal his vehicle, leaving him in the middle of nowhere. I decided not to back up, and when the 2 people in the road saw me put my truck back in gear and drive away, they both got up and walked toward the shoulder. I called the police and explained what happened, but we were so far away from civilization that I doubt anything came of it. Thanks to that old graybeard, I got to keep my truck, my job, and my teeth. Not sure if this story is creepy, but it's definitely scary. My father was a truck driver in East Africa in the 80s and early 90s. During the years leading up to the Rwandan genocide, my father was passing through Rwanda. He reached a checkpoint and was forcibly removed from his truck at gunpoint. Apparently he looked like he belonged to the Tutsi tribe, and they put him in a cage with other Tutsi prisoners. He tried communicating that he isn't Rwandan, but no one spoke the same language as him. Every night they would take about 5 people from the cage and slaughter them in front of him. After the 3rd night, he saw a man that spoke a little bit of Swahili, which my dad spoke, and told him that he's not Rwandan, and showed him his it. Somehow that guy got him out, and he was handed the keys to his truck, and was on his way. Driving through an abandoned section of Baltimore at 3 in the morning, my CB radio turned itself on, and crackled for a bit. Out of nowhere some voice over the radio said in a deep southern drawl, "I ain't got no panties on." I could see up and down the interstate for miles and saw not one set of headlights. A good buddy of mine is a long-haul trucker for my company. A few months ago, he woke up in a parking lot surrounded by police. Some dude had gotten shot and dumped 15 feet from his truck. Driving through rural NM, Bisty area with the crazy melted rock look. No plants or anything, just rock and sand. Monsoon time, raining cats and dogs just pouring so hard you could barely see going 20 miles per hour. Thunder and lightning just rocking the car, sometimes turning into hail and pounding you. Just a nasty storm. Came around the corner, and the whole countryside legit on fire. Like 20 feet tall flames. Hundreds of yards in all directions, while pouring rain at dusk. Just rocks and dirt wildly on fire in the pouring rain. Just slowly drove on. Was totally freaky and surreal. Honestly thought I may have hallucinated it. Checked the news. A propane truck slid off the road going way too fast and apparently busted open pretty violently and lit on fire. Never saw the truck. Must have been behind something. Felt a bit bad after about not stopping. Not a truck driver, but I have one weird story from when I was a kid. My parents always took us on long road trips every summer and my dad liked to take meandering routes through rural towns to see all the tourist traps. One trip, we passed through a little town in Illinois, the kind you miss a few sneeze. This one had mannequins. Every house and business was only populated by mannequins. I don't remember seeing any people. Everything looked maintained and clean, so someone was at least caring for the place. There weren't any signs or anything indicating it was for tourists. Just a convenience store / bait shop with a sign reading "Eat here, get worms." My dad drove a truck between Edinburgh and London and tells this story often. He was driving down the motorway and looked to his right, saw a woman with a mistrunchable bun, as he describes it, staring at him with a terrified expression from a car next to him. Before he really knows how to react, the car pulls off at the next exit and my dad, although shaken, carries on. About half an hour later a different car with a different driver pulls alongside my dad, with the same woman in the passenger seat, with the same expression on her face. My dad thinks back, quote, "Fuck this," and plans to pull into the next services to report, as even if it's nothing / misunderstanding, better to be safe than sorry, right? Anyway, the car disappears before he can get any details. Plate CTC, and he thinks there is no point calling the police with no details, so he carries on driving. Literally about 4 hours later, almost in London, yet another car pulls alongside him with the same woman, same mistrunchable hair, same terrified expression, except this time she appears to be screaming at my dad through the window. So my dad pulls over into a lobby and calls the police. Apparently they have received 3 other calls about the same woman / car in the same area in the last few minutes. It is unfortunately anticlimactic as he never heard anything more about it, but he didn't see her again. And although he kept an eye on the news, didn't see anything about it. Hopefully it's just a giant coincidence. Who knows? Driving through a national park in the middle of the night going through a slow stretch at about 30 km/h. Every so often I think I see something out the window and beside me. Just a glimpse of movement. When I eye rock though I don't catch it. Finally on about the 3rd time I whip my head around, and this time I recognize it's a huge black wolf following alongside my truck just off the highway. I only saw it for a few seconds before I had to focus back on the road, but it was absolutely lovely yet unsettling. Not exactly creepy but definitely terrifying. My father was a truck driver, and he was driving through a smaller town in Northern California hauling tomatoes. Suddenly he got incredibly tired. Wasn't low on sleep or deprived at all but ended up passing out at the wheel. Last thing he saw was the light of the town in front of him. He woke up about 2 hours later on the other side of town, perfectly parked on the side of the road. He swears something was looking out for him that night. I was driving through eastern Washington on some state roads. There were no rest stops or cities, but I had done the route enough to know there were these matted dirt areas every 40 miles, where you could park safely away from the road. I decided to call it a night, and closed my blinds, and laid down to watch something on my phone. After roughly an hour I hear someone try to open the driver's side door. I haven't heard any vehicles on the road the whole time I'm parked, but I get up, to peek out the curtains. As I'm looking out into the blackness of the driver's side window, I hear them try the passenger side door. I peek down from the top of the curtain, but can't see anything, so I start the truck and kick on the lights. I'm fairly freaked out at this point, so I'm still not opening the curtains, but peeking through gaps. Nothing. Nobody is standing near either of my doors, or parked within sightline. I take a deep breath and close the sleeper curtains too, because for some reason that's going to make things better, right? After laying back down and convincing myself that something blew against the truck and it only sounded like the doors, it was fairly windy outside and a lot of flat ground, I hear what sounds like someone trying to pry open the vents on the sleeper. The door handles start clicking again, and the truck starts shifting like someone is climbing on it. I hit the little alarm button in the sleeper hoping to spook them off, but it does nothing but add to the noise of door handles, fingers tapping on windows and chassis, and the hiss of air coming out of the suspension. Then suddenly it stops. A few moments where I can only hear myself breathing and my heart pounding, before I hear another truck approach, and then drive by. I spent the next few hours waiting for whatever it was to come back, but it never did. In the morning I couldn't find any footprints or damage to my truck, but on every window were tiny human-looking handprints, like a toddler had licked their hand and stuck it to my window over and over. Not a truck driver, but I've spent the past 4 years driving every day/night for work. I was in a fairly rural part of Mississippi, somewhere between Clarksdale and Greenwood. Important note, it's all 2-lane highway, the 250-mile drive home. The weather had turned pretty sour as I was leaving Clarksdale. I called my wife, told her there was high wind advisories and very possible tornado threats throughout the Delta, and I'd call her as soon as I made it to a safe area again. I had already been working for 14 hours when I got in the truck, so I had ate dinner and grabbed some coffee to stay awake and alert. Now, if you have never driven through flat farmland at night for 100 miles, it's very fatiguing and spooky without inclement weather. I had driven maybe 30 miles out into the farmland when hail started bouncing off my truck. Being a millisecond native, I knew in July hail meant tornado. I pull off to the side. I'm in the middle of nowhere, no lights to be seen, no cars behind or in front of me, and start looking for the storm/tornado I believe is approaching. I rolled the passenger window down and shined a bright flashlight off into the night. Nothing there. Turn to the driver's side and this guy has his face pushed against the glass, grinning from ear to ear. I screamed and he was gone. I slammed the truck in drive and took off. We have all the time running cameras on our trucks. I got to the first safe place to stop and called my wife. I didn't want to scare her, so I didn't mention the guy or the hailstorm. I did however pull the SD card and check the cameras. I promise you this guy never popped up on my front or rear cameras. I've always played it off as my imagination. I will say I don't drive through the Delta in the dark anymore, if I don't absolutely have to. Years ago I read an answer on a thread with this question, about a guy who was riding with his truck driver father as a child. They were in the middle of nowhere, and they were coming up on a person laying in the road with no one else around, no cars, etc. His dad blew the horn. They didn't move. He blew it again as he got closer. They didn't move. He told his son to put his head down and cover his eyes, and he ran the person over. When they looked back, a bunch of people who were previously hiding were running out of the woods, and the gist was that his dad knew it was a setup for a robbery or worse and wasn't chancing it with his child in the car. No clue if it was true or not, but I think about that story all the time. Story handed down from my grandfather. In his youth he was a lumberjack in rural Washington/Oregon, which according to him was fairly uneventful save one incident. He and 3 others are taking a car to their residences late one night, technically morning, and he and the other guy in the back seat pass out, while the passenger seat keeps up a conversation to make sure the driver stays alert. Sometime in the night, he and the other guy get woken up to the car screeching to a halt. Both the driver and passenger are staring out the window, swearing and pale-faced. All 4 get a good, long look at something really tall standing in the headlights down the road, black and wide. The driver did the fastest 3-point turn my grandfather had ever seen, and took a different route. They came to the consensus that this was probably a bear that got spooked by the car, and tried to scare it off. Whatever it was, my grandpa proceeded to retell the story at every family get-together afterwards, so it's pretty burnt into my memory. I was in the middle of absolutely nowhere in Texas and getting so tired, and there were absolutely no lights anywhere around me but the stars. I guess I kinda messed up a turn at one of those forks in the road when a calm voice came loud over the CB. "Driver, looks like it's time for you to pull over and grab some sleep." So I did. I'm not ignoring Invisible Citizen Band Jesus. The obligatory not a truck driver, but a second-hand story I heard. My great uncle drove big trucks, living in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes people would leave trash on the road, and since he had a big truck he'd just smash into said boxes or paper and continue on. One day he was coming up on a cardboard box and just had the urge to swerve and miss this one. He misses it and passes by with no incident, looks in his rear view to look at the box, and out pops a kindergarten age little kid that just heads back to their house as nothing happened. Literally reposting my comment from another thread just like this. I work for a railroad. Not necessarily remote, but sometimes it's just a conductor and engineer cruising along ±10 miles per hour on very isolated, fairly wooded track. I've heard a few older guys mention something about a family or a man with a suitcase. Something along those lines, don't really remember. Walking down the track with no concerns. Constant blowing of the horn, flashing of the lights etc. Just kept walking down the track, then disappearing. Near Weatherly, Pa. I also experienced a pretty intense trip myself one night coming home from New Jersey. Saw my first dead body laying along the rail, which in itself was kinda interesting. Then the only other part of my trip, where we were required to run at a slow speed, I heard the craziest blood-curdling scream I have ever heard in my entire life. One of the nights I will probably remember until I retire. Not technically a truck driver, but I used to work as a field technician in the oil industry, so I spent a lot of time driving through remote areas of Canada at odd hours. One very strange and eerie experience sticks with me. I was in either northeast BC or northwest Alberta, can't remember the exact location, driving late at night, when I noticed a very large black shape on the road in front of me. Thinking it was a moose, I stepped on the brakes, coming to a stop only a few feet from it. Despite being so close, and having my headlights shining directly on it, I still couldn't tell what I was looking at. It was vaguely the shape of a full-legged animal, but very big, probably about 6 feet tall. Aside from that, it was completely featureless. I couldn't make out any details whatsoever, no shine from its eyes, nothing. And then I noticed there were more of them in the ditch on both sides of the road. 5 or 6, or maybe more, all the same as the black shape on the road in front of me. None of them were moving. They didn't look like physical objects or living things, more like just large patches of absolute darkness. After I got over my shock, dread started to set in, and I drove around the thing on the road and sped off. I don't really believe this was a paranormal experience. I had been driving for 8+ hours through the middle of the night, and I was exhausted. Most likely, it was a hallucination caused by lack of sleep and spending too long staring straight ahead into the dark. But it was still a very unsettling experience. Not technically a truck driver, but my cousin works at a truck stop in Kansas. She told me about some guy who parked his truck and got out. A woman got out of the passenger seat. It was kinda cold, so the trucker was wearing a coat and hat, but the woman was wearing summer cloths. My cousin thought nothing of it and did her whole hi welcome in. The trucker bought a coffee, but the woman just stood there in the doorway. Now my cousin was freaked out. She didn't want to be rude, but she was a teenage girl alone in a gas station in the middle of nowhere. "Excuse me, miss, do you need anything?" she asked. "Who are you talking to?" the truck driver asked when he got to the checkout. "The woman who got out of your truck?" My cousin pointed, but the woman had disappeared. She told me she had never seen a look of pure terror on a man's face. He just whisper-required "oh no," got his coffee and left. The woman did not get back into his truck and my cousin couldn't find her in the store. She says it was one of the most terrifying experiences she had ever had while on that job. My uncle was driving between Great Falls and Helena at around 3 a.m. He had his high beams on as it was a lonely drive and quiet highway. In the distance he saw something cross the median and started to slow his approach, thinking it was a deer. As he got closer, he realized it was standing up, and so he slowed down to about 30 miles per hour. He realized what it was and started to panic. A man in blue coveralls with a pig's head not a mask, but literally the head of a pig on his shoulder. My uncle moved to the left lane, and as he passed, Big Head lunged at the truck. My uncle didn't stop to check if he'd grabbed on till he was in the safety of Helena. Nothing was out of the ordinary there, but on that stretch of road now, he doesn't slow down for anything. My father's told me this story maybe 1,000 times. My family, as well as a couple of uncles and my oldest cousin, went on a trip from Mexico City to Acapulco when I was barely a year old. Back home in the middle of the night. The good old days when you could travel at night. The car broke down, and a police car quickly came to our help. There were 3 policemen in the car, and the chief offered to take my dad to the nearest gas station, where he could find a mechanic, and told the other 2 officers to stay with our car. My dad says they seem absolutely not pleased with the order, until the chief told them, don't worry, there's a woman and 2 children. That seemed to calm the 2 officers. Driving to the gas station on the police car, my dad asked the chief what was all that about. The chief told him that there had been many accidents in that part of the road, that's why they were able to find our car so quickly. All of the accidents involved young men traveling without female or child company. Those who had survived said that they crashed because they could see a very beautiful woman next to the road, but once they came close to her, she turned out to be just a rotting corpse staring at them, and they crashed because they were paralyzed by fear. FedEx contractor, I'm in one of those big box trucks. Anyways, I finished a long delivery day, and I swear to whatever fucking gods you believe in that I was hearing voices in my cab. It wasn't the radio, it wasn't my tinnitus, it wasn't my subconscious. I was hearing whispered voices in my right ear that were coming from the passenger seat. The voices continued even after I had gotten back to my hub, clocked out, and hopped in my own car to go home. They only stopped when I left the parking lot. It only happened that night. I still have no fucking idea what the hell it was, because I had ruled everything else out. As a crew guy of an off-road racing team in Baja California, Mexico, I got to test drive some rigs and trucks, so technically truck driver. We were driving down south along Sea of Cortez with a buddy at night at this 4-hour dirt road to Gonzaga, which is pretty much in the middle of fucking nowhere in the desert, and we see the lights of a car behind coming down fast and now effectively tailing us, and the bastard had bar mount headlights on top, or what seemed like it, which are super bright. It's normal, always, that locals and gringos get wasted in the nearest, now former dew-covered, spring breaker town, and then go down this road super fast to test their rigs, since there's no police there. So I try waving him off to get the guy to keep them lights low, since he's blinding us, but he isn't slowing down a bit nor turn his roof lights off, and it was a dangerous super dark road. Finally, near a curve near the shore, I found a spot to bail off the road without crashing, and we see lights passing by us super fast and going straight to the curve, and we were like, that's it, he is going to crash down to the sea, but the lights didn't fall on. Kept going straight into the beach and the sea, and then pitched up abruptly to the night sky and disappeared. We didn't say a word for a minute or so, and then my buddy goes, did you see it? And I say, the fucking flying truck. Didn't talk about anymore, as simply it didn't make sense to talk about it, or with anyone else when we arrived. I posted this in another thread. Not a truck driver, but do a lot of driving for work, and I just like driving. Driving from Spokane, Wa to Omaha, northeast, was cruising down Highway 212 in the middle of the night in southern Montana. About 2 AM I'm pulling through the only town, Lame Deer, Mount maybe? I've tried to find it on a map since, but can't be certain. On that lonely stretch of highway, one stoplight town, and I get stopped at the only red light. Hadn't seen a vehicle on the road since I had hopped off I-90 about an hour prior, and there wasn't a single person outside in the town. Sitting at that red light, a loud siren/alarm starts sounding. Loud enough that I don't see how any person in the town, or within a few miles could slept through it. It reminded me of the siren from the movie Silent Hill. I gunned it through the red light, and away from that town as fast as my little 4-cylinder Malibu would go. It may not seem that crazy, but just imagine the most haunting sound you've ever heard, in a place you've never been. Several hours separated from seeing a person last. I'm sure there's an innocent explanation for the siren, but it still sends chills down my spine just thinking of it. Reno, NV. A place on the north side of town, way off the freeway towards an old military road. I got there early at like 1 AM, They didn't open till 6 a.m. The facility was closed, so no one around, and I just pulled into the lot and parked off to the side. So I went to sleep and was woken shortly after to someone knocking on the door/window, firmly to the point the truck shook. I jump out of bed thinking they are there already and want to offload me early. I get to the door and no one is there, so I step down thinking they are behind the trailer looking at the door seal or something. No one around. I look under the truck and around, absolutely no one. No wind or bad weather, not another person around. I jump in the truck and pull out of there as fast as I could and went and parked in a nearby truck stop. Still can't explain it. I mean, I guess I can justify I could have imagined the sound, but the truck shaking was definitely real, so I don't know. This will get lost, but if someone gets to read it, then hey. Obligatory. This is my dad's story, who's been a trucker for over 50 years. He tells us of these experiences. When we ask otherwise, he doesn't really speak of them. One night he was doing a long run. He knew he wouldn't make it home that night, so when he saw an old looking pub up ahead, Ireland, he decided to park up for the night about 1:30 am and get himself a nice pint. He went into the bar and thought everyone was dressed really old fashioned and dancing. He thought nothing of it and got himself a Guinness. He still says to this day it was the nicest pint he's ever had in his entire life. After he finished his pint, faces started to get fuzzy. He said it was like they were going out of focus. So he got back in the cab, pulled his curtains, and done his crosswords until he fell asleep. The next morning, when he woke up, he was going to get some breakfast and a coffee from the pub before he start driving again. He pulled his curtains and saw the pub from last night was derelict and boarded up, under shade for many years. He has no explanation for it, but he knows it wasn't a dream. My dad has many experiences like this one. If anyone wants to hear them, just let me know. Not a trucker, but I had a college teammate from Miami tell a story that he swears on to this day. He and his girlfriend were making the drive to Naples late night on a 2-lane road through the Everglades and had been in a line of cars behind an 18-wheeler for multiple miles. She fell asleep and he was surfing for something to listen to on the radio. Only one station came in clearly enough to be tolerable, so he gave it a listen. The DJ came on and said something along the lines of, "The stars are extra bright in the Everglades tonight. If you're driving through there, pull off and take a look." He said he normally wouldn't even think of it, but for some reason felt compelled to that night. He woke up his girlfriend. She was annoyed and didn't want to, but he convinced her it would be worth it. They stopped and just took in the stars for 5 to 10 minutes. He said it was the most amazing sky he's ever seen. They get back on the road and drive another few minutes and come across a massive accident. The truck they were following had jackknifed and took out a handful of vehicles that were following. He said there are multiple fatalities, but I've never been able to find a new story about it to confirm. Probably would have been in 2005-ish. They most likely would have been involved, if not for that random DJ on the only radio station to come in that night. Not exactly relevant, but still creepy AF. My dad is a trucker, and about 20 some years ago, a woman committed suicide by running out in front of him. He said that every night around the time she died, the cab of his truck would drop a few degrees in temperature, and he felt a presence. He said this went on for a few weeks and finally he spoke out to her and said he forgave her and wished that she had peace. He said he never experienced the eeriness again.